welcome to the launch event for the Mukhayriq Initiative, a new effort to strengthen Muslim-Jewish ties today by drawing inspiration from the past, from the ancient bonds between these two Abrahamic faiths. I'm Nurit Ben. It's a pleasure to have you with us. So here's a story you might have never heard. On this day, nearly 1,400 years ago, in 625 CE, a Jewish rabbi named Mukhayriq gave his life fighting to defend the Prophet Muhammad at the legendary Battle of Uhud. That's just outside of Medina in what is today Saudi Arabia. The rabbi made his decision to join Muhammad's forces at the battlefront, though the attack was happening during the Jewish Sabbath. Rabbi Mukhayriq left his synagogue, with many congregants following suit, to join Muhammad. And more than that, he insisted on standing at the front line to let the attacking forces from Mecca know the Jewish community of Medina stood with Muhammad. Before the battle, Mukhayriq instructed that should he be killed, Muhammad would become the trustee of his estate. And the rabbi was indeed struck down. His palm groves became the first ever waqf, an Islamic trust, with proceeds going to widows and orphans. The Prophet Muhammad later eulogized him as the best of the Jews. It's a story that has been obscured over the centuries, and most Muslims and Jews have never even heard of it. Now, the Mukhayriq Initiative is looking to change that, to help revive his story and harness the spirit of that friendship in the face of the many, many challenges straining ties between Muslims and Jews, recovering a forgotten past to build a better future. We're here broadcasting on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, and if you miss anything, you'll get a recap in your inbox, and a full recording of the event will be online on the Mukhayriq Initiative's website and social media. And we'll be hearing from a distinguished group of leaders and advocates, all doing their major part to make this mission happen. But first, it's my pleasure to welcome from Washington, Mukhayriq Initiative Managing Director Eli Kohanim, a native of Iran and the U.S. State Department's former Deputy Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. Eli, it's so great to have you with us here. Of course, you're a key part of this event. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be a part of this mission. I know it's close to your heart.
Nurit, it's wonderful to be with you, and truly it is close to my heart. I have to start by saying salam and shalom to my dear friends. Today, we're honoring the friendship between Islam's Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Mukhayriq, as well as the many close friendships between Muslims and Jews that have existed over the past 14 centuries. These are friendships that my ancestors in ancient Persia had with their neighbors, classmates, colleagues, and business partners. I feel the presence of these ancestors today, and I honor the legacy they've passed down to us. Of course, I recognize that there are many obstacles before us, including forces that seek to divide rather than unite. But I also believe that Muslims and Jews have an amazing opportunity before us. Throughout history, whenever Jews and Muslims have worked closely together, the world became a better place. And today, we aim to write an exciting new chapter in that shared effort to improve the world. Today, we're commemorating the first great moment of connection, the connection of Rabbi Mukhayriq, who died in the Battle of Uhud in support of the Prophet Muhammad, and who also left his estate to the Prophet Muhammad as a charitable trust, a waqf. Amazingly, those palm groves still exist today as a Muslim charitable trust. It's a testament to a friendship that began over 1,400 years ago. We're here today to honor that history and to let it inspire us to build an even better future for our children and grandchildren. Like too many Muslims and Jews, I have personally experienced the pain of extremism. I was born in Tehran, the descendant of one of the most ancient Jewish communities in the world. Persian Jews have lived in our beautiful homeland of Persia, which became Iran, for over 2,500 years. In 1979, I experienced the rise of an extremist political movement claiming the mantle of religion. I and the vast majority of Iran's Jews suddenly had to flee our homes. I've never been able to return. The wounds of being uprooted are deep, but I am committed to healing those wounds. Many Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, like me, still recall the aroma of the flowers, the flavors of the food, and the warmth of our homes. We miss all of this, and we miss our old friends and neighbors. We want our children to remain connected to our culture And we dream that our children will be able to connect in peace with the children of our Muslim neighbors and friends we left behind. The Mukhayriq Initiative is one small step in that process of reconnecting. We bring together Muslims and Jews who act in the spirit of Islam's Prophet Muhammad and Mukhayriq. You're about to hear from individuals who are leaders in their own communities and who have taken bold action to advance Muslim-Jewish relations. We hope you're inspired by their example and encouraged to get involved. So stay tuned until the end of our program to learn about how you can help unite Muslims and Jews.
Eli Kohanim, thanks so much for that. And I love that image of the palm groves that are still sort of a living reminder today of that incredible story and hopefully the potential going forward. You're, of course, going to be with us throughout the broadcast. We're going to be going back to you for a quite amazing conversation in just a little while. But first, I want to introduce two Mukhayriq Initiative board members for a conversation on nurturing closer Muslim-Jewish ties, something that they're both well-versed in. With us from New York is Jason Guberman, the executive director of the American Sephardi Federation. They promote the history, traditions, and rich culture of greater Sephardic communities as a key part of the Jewish experience. And joining the conversation from Rabat, Morocco, is El Mehdi Boudra. He's founder and chairman of Mimouna. That's an organization of Moroccan Muslims committed to preserving the vibrant culture and heritage of North Africa's ancient Jewish community. Thank you both so much for being with us. It's a pleasure to see you. So, El Mehdi, let me start with you. Morocco, your country, has a very rich history, a very rich Jewish history. I believe it's over 250,000 Jews in the past. Today, just a few thousand. What inspired you to get involved in this in the first place, to try to preserve and revive that culture?
Thank you so much. As you know, the roots of the Jewish community in Morocco go back to antiquity. As you said, in World War II, the Jewish population in Morocco reached 250,000. It was the biggest non-Ashkenazi community in the world and the biggest community in the Muslim world. Today, the Moroccan Jewish community living in Morocco does not exceed 3,000 members. However, this is a very active community and it remains one of the strongest Jewish communities in the Muslim world and retains a strong link with the 1 million Moroccan Jews living in diaspora. What personally inspired me is my grandmother, as she always told me that we are proud Muslims by religion, we are ethnically Arabs and Amazighs, but we are also Jewish by culture. Then it's part of our own identity. I think what she said was the perception that we have in Morocco of diversity, as we see diversity as a gift to the Moroccan people, and we are proud to be all of that in the same time.
Jason, so tell me from your perspective, this story in particular, where of course you're talking about the Mukhayriq Initiative, this is a launch event, this ancient story that so few people I think know about, what kind of inspiration do you draw from that, especially as someone that's on a daily basis really trying to advance this cause?
Well, what we have to appreciate is that the Battle of Uhud was a challenge. Mukhayriq and his three commanders, advisors, including Rabbi Mukhayriq, were facing fanatics who wanted to destroy the model for coexistence that had come to be in Medina thanks to the Charter of Medina and all the communities coming together as part of the Ummah. And the inspiration I derive from it is that even though the challenges may be severe and the enemy's very crafty and extreme, you can overcome them by working together.
That's a great message and a reminder that it is necessary to work together to overcome radicalism, and that's something that comes up so often today. El Mehdi, on a bigger scale, if we're looking at Morocco in this attempt to not only revive or remember the Jewish history, but to really take it a step forward into the future, what are some of the initiatives that the government is undertaking to try to make that happen?
His Majesty King Mohammed VI's devotion to maintain and enhance Jewish heritage and presence in Morocco is very visible. From the maintenance from 200 Jewish shrines and cemeteries around Morocco, to renaming the streets of the Mellah to their original Jewish names, to restoring synagogues around Morocco, and integrating the Judo-Moroccan history and heritage into the Moroccan curriculum books. Morocco has demonstrated a remarkable inclusiveness of our Jewish heritage in Morocco. Moreover, His Majesty King Mohammed VI rejected Holocaust denial by declaring that Moroccans do not suffer from amnesia and that the Holocaust is one of the dark chapters of human history. Today, we have the first Jewish museum in the Arab world, created in 1997 by the Foundation of Moroccan Jewish Heritage in Casablanca. And we have two other important centers inaugurated by His Majesty himself. The Synagogue Tiedri in Casablanca, who became a museum in the Medina of Casablanca, and the Synagogue Atiya in Essaouira, who became a center, Beit Dakira, the first academic international center for Muslim Jewish dialogue. I think what Morocco is doing is to be proud of its diversity and to try to see these diversities as an opportunity and a gift to the Moroccan people.
Seeing diversity as opportunity and a gift, if only everybody could see it that way, that's a great message to keep with us. And Jason, I want to talk to you just about one more project I know you guys have underway in partnership with young Moroccans and with USAID. Tell us about that.
So as my colleague El-Mehdi Boudra was saying, King Mohammed VI's vision to preserve and perpetuate Morocco's pluralist past has taken a variety of forms. On the civil society side, and really a lot of the credit goes to El-Mehdi and Laziza and our colleagues and friends in Association Mimuna, there have been a great many initiatives as well in support of what the vision and realizing the vision of His Majesty. Our project right now, in partnership with USAID, is called Rebuilding Our Homes. And the idea is to restore and revive the spirit of the Mellahs in Essaouira, Rabat, and Fez, three of the central cities of the Moroccan Jewish history, which today are socioeconomically disadvantaged and in which Muslim youth growing up have no or limited connection to the Jewish past. So we're providing them with the tools to build peace, prosperity, and progress through learning Hebrew, learning English, learning artisanal skills, in helping document the last primary source generation of Muslims who remember their Jewish neighbors and friends. And this is an ongoing project between ASF and Association Mimuna, with the support of USAID and the goodwill of all the people of Morocco, and fulfilling the vision of His Majesty.
All right, Jason Guberman and El-Mehdi Boudra, thanks so much for being with us. And of course, stay with us and listen along. Our next guest is a native of Lebanon who hails from a distinguished rabbinical lineage and was the founding rabbi of the Manhattan East Synagogue in New York City. Today, he's become an integral part of the new relationships being formed, living in Dubai and serving as the senior rabbi of the Jewish Council of the Emirates and the chief rabbi of the Association of Gulf Jewish Communities. Great to even say that as a title that exists. Welcome, Rabbi Dr. Eli Abadi. Thanks so much for being back with us. It's good to see you. I want to look back with you for a moment also, because, I mean, over your lifetime, over the lifetime of your parents' generation, we saw this mass, Jews fleeing by the hundreds of thousands, nearly 1 million Jews fleeing their homes in Muslim-majority nations. What does it mean for you to be back now fulfilling this role again in a Muslim nation?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you in this event of such an importance that builds the bridges and bridges the gap between Muslims and Jews. I'll tell you, my history really dates back decades, if not centuries. My parents were those ones who were expelled, persecuted, together over 1 million Jews from 10 Arab countries at the heel of the establishment of the State of Israel. And many of those Jews lost their citizenship, their properties, their wealth, their possessions. Many of them left with just the shirt on their back, as they say, with a very, very small suitcase that carried maybe only for 1 day clothing. And many of them left even without that, on their pajamas. They had to escape, and some others were imprisoned. My parents, who came from Syria, escaped to Lebanon, almost were killed as Syria imprisoned their Jews until the 1990s. And so I was born in Lebanon, in an Arab country, heard the Mu'adhin several times a day, lived pretty much tranquilly, although we knew we were living in an Arab country. We were Jews. Our neighbors knew that we were Jews. We had to be very careful and live quietly in a sense. And so for me, having left Lebanon also in a hurry, as my father became the target of the PLO at that time that had come to Lebanon to escape Black September and Jordan revolution. We had to escape Lebanon as my father, as I said, became a target, and we did not know if he would survive. We escaped to Mexico. I grew up there and lived my life there and also in the United States. Coming back here to the United Arab Emirates, for me, was kind of a closing the circle of having left an Arab country, of having born in an Arab country, lived in an Arab country, and yet thrown into the West, Mexico and the United States, and yet coming back here after so many decades, is on a personal level kind of a vindication in a sense, a feeling of that the Arab world has come to recognize the great historic mistake or the great injustice that they did with their Jewish communities, with their Jewish cousins, communities that have lived in the Middle East and North Africa for over 2,000 years. My parents from Aleppo, Syria, Aleppo is believed to have had Jews 3,000 years ago from the time of King David. And so coming back and closing that circle is that sense of, indeed, maybe the world is changing. Maybe we could overcome the forces of evil and overcome the forces that wanted to divide us and divided us for over 73, 74 years.
Rabbi,
and now,
well, you know,
and now those forces are being vanquished in a sense. And so coming back to an Arab country that has welcomed us, that has embraced us, that has pretty much put the red carpet for us to come in and is assisting us on a daily basis, is again that feeling of we belong here. We've been here in this region for thousands of years, maybe not necessarily in this country because this country did not exist, but being together on a daily basis, commingling, living together with our Arab cousins and Muslim brothers. It has been a great sense of accomplishment, again, of vindication, of coming back, of closing that circle. And then noticing that there are Jewish communities and Jewish individuals in other countries in the Gulf, and starting the Association of Gulf Jewish Communities to serve those Jews for their spiritual nourishment, for their religious learning and teaching, for their even social accomplishments around other Jews and living together. It has been a truly rewarding experience on a personal level, of course, on a communal level, and on a people level.
Rabbi Abadi, it's risky business for anybody to try to predict the future these days, but I'll ask you anyway, especially from your experience, really they're immersed in those new growing communities in the Gulf. What is your vision? What can you imagine that Jewish life in some of these countries and really across the Middle East could look like 20 years down the line if we were to, hope that it is going in that more positive direction? What's the potential you see from your vantage point?
Well, when I arrived here, there were 200 to 250 Jews. In 1 year, we have doubled that number. Now we are 500 active Jews. And I believe this number will be doubled every year for the next 3 to 5 years, if not more. I believe this almost represents when the Ottoman Empire opened up their doors to allow the exilarchs from Spain and from Portugal to come to the Ottoman Empire, to inhabit it, to live and to develop. I believe we are almost at that historical moment in which the Gulf is opening up its doors. And I believe more doors will be open amongst other countries in the Gulf and eventually other countries in the Arab world, from the Middle East to North Africa. I do see a bright future. Hopefully that the situation not only stays the way it is, but even improves. And I am optimistic that it will, because the forces of tolerance, of coexistence, those that believe that indeed we belong in this area, that we are together in that sense, are going to prevail. And for that, I do believe that there will be communities numbering in the thousands in the next 20 years.
That's great to hear, and it is always important, especially with such a sensitive issue, with such historical baggage, I would say, to have an example. And so to see what's happening in the Gulf and those growing Jewish communities that has doubled, as you say, just so recently, can be a great example, hopefully for other nations to take that step forward that they might not have taken in the past. Rabbi Dr. Eli Abadi, thanks, as always, thanks for the work you do and for being with us. And I want to move on now to a conversation between two incredible women doing some amazing work. First, Mukhayriq Initiative founding board member, Anila Ali. She's a grassroots Muslim community leader and an outspoken civil rights advocate committed to empowering female leadership. Anila was born in Karachi into a family that helped form the modern state of Pakistan. Her life journey eventually took her over to the U.S. There, as a public school teacher and Democratic Party activist, she co-founded the American Muslim and Multi-Faith Women Empowerment Council. Among its many initiatives, they've for years held an annual interfaith iftar, bringing people of diverse backgrounds together to celebrate Ramadan. And joining our conversation, who's done some amazing work with her, Dr. Gwen Hecht, they've partnered together to build schools for at-risk girls in rural Pakistan. Now, Anila, well, first of all, thank you both so much for being with us. And Anila, I want to start with you and, tell us a little bit about your own personal story, how you got to this as well, especially given your family history. What made you want to become an advocate for Muslim-Jewish relations in the first place?
Well, thank you for that introduction. I must say that, yes, I grew up in Pakistan, but my Pakistan was a little different. My grandparents were visionaries, my parents also, and my grandmother used to tell me the stories of Moses, Abraham, Prophet Muhammad, and how he was, how he regarded the other communities. So I would always ask, like, when we pray 5 times a day and we're sitting down and we say the durood, what are we saying? I always ask my mother, I asked my grandmother, and she would say, we're sending blessings to Ibrahim alayhis salam and his people. We do that 5 times a day in our prayers. How can I forget that? Fast forward, I go to England and my father's a diplomat. And he tells me, well, you can make friends with everybody, but just not any Israelis, because Pakistan does not have a relationship with Israel. So I heard that and it sort of went the other way. And my first friend was Joel from Israel. And we found so much in common that, of course, when my father was told by his Secret Service that your daughter has an Israeli friend, he came to me and he said, I have heard that you have a young man from Israel who's your friend. And I said, yes, Abba, because they're people of Ibrahim. And my father laughed and he sort of ignored it. And I knew at that time that was, that's what we're all about. We are cousins. We are from the same lineage. And that's what we all have to remember. So all my life in America for the past 25 years, I have realized that I want to build that awareness. I want to bring that, the Prophet's Islam back. Now, I don't know if you all know, but the first thing that we learn as we start learning about the Prophet of Islam is that he was given a title by the Jewish tribes. It was called Al-Amin, which is the most trusted. Why don't we hear that now? I heard that as I was growing up, so you can see my whole thinking was very different. We also did not know about this beautiful story of Rabbi Mukhayriq. Now we do. We need to highlight and we need to not minimize, but we need to highlight all of these common traits that we have. And I think that, just the fact that 5 times a day a Muslim in his or her prayers is blessing the Jewish people and all people of Ibrahim, we need to change things a little bit. We need to talk about these beautiful commonalities that we have. And that is why I'm here. That is what I believe in. I believe that Prophet Muhammad, yes, for Muslims, it's the culmination, but it's the lineage of prophets that we have. We have traditions going back to Judaism. We have traditions going back to Jerusalem. Muslims used to pray to Jerusalem, and then it moved to Kaaba, so that we can all exist and love each other. And that's what I truly believe in. And thus you can see I'm honored to be here.
Well, it sounds like some of the best wisdom in your case and others that we've heard comes from the grandmothers. We can see how impactful that is to have that in the family. What a special way to be raised also that really helped direct that life mission. Gwen, let me ask you sort of the same question. I mean, where did the spark come for you to help sponsor schools for at-risk girls in Pakistan?
We talk about being cousins, but in point of fact, we are sisters and brothers of a different mother. That's the position I take with this. But more to the point, I suppose, I came from a situation of great impoverishment. We were impoverished financially, socially, culturally, educationally. The only thing we had plenty of was abuse. And overcoming that kind of childhood in order to succeed took a tremendous amount of effort and gives me great compassion for those who do the same, whether they are children in another country or women who are just trying to be themselves and find their own voice. I want to be a part of making that happen. My life has been committed to helping others identify, develop, and manifest their potential. And oftentimes that potential needs to be identified in childhood. The children of Pakistan are what calls me. This calls me. Children around the world, women around the world. So when I'm asked, how is it that a Jew supports a school in Pakistan, or multiple schools, in fact, in Pakistan? I don't see that the religion is the issue here. I'm not there supporting Muslim children, to be honest with you. I am there helping children create a future for themselves and the adults around them, their parents, as well as their teachers, who just happen to be Muslim. But the truth of the matter is Pakistan is multi-religious, if you will. There are many different religions there. And in our schools there, the schools that Anila, Ali, and I work together on, partner on, we have children of different religions. Predominantly Muslim, yes, and their parents predominantly Muslim. And what we do for the village has resulted in the children obtaining a quality education, their parents learning. And we talk about, you were mentioning earlier, Anila, that parents that you grew up, praying 5 times a day, essentially for Ibrahim, right? Well, in this village now, there is a mosque in our villages, and the mosque has carpeting that I paid for. And 5 times a day, these men get on their knees and pray for a Jewish woman in California, someplace they will never see, and pray for my well-being. And I think that's a nice cycle. I'm really pleased about that.
It is a nice
cycle. So I'm there to help the children. Mm-hmm.
Well, so let me ask you, and I'll start with you, Anila. I'm curious to hear both of your take on this. I'm assuming it's not every day you see 2 women, a Muslim and a Jew in rural Pakistan, working together to build schools. So tell me a little bit about the reaction that you've gotten. I mean, what is that like when you're on the ground there and telling people about your work?
Well, the first time that Dr. Hecht went to Pakistan, of course, nobody was talking about what religion are you. They were just, this American woman, why has she come here when our people come here, ignore us, and they don't care if we have water, electricity, or education. And they were just overwhelmed with her love and her generosity. And then the next time when I went, all the villagers got together, and it was beautiful moonlit night. And the elder got up and he said, we know that Dr. Hecht is Jewish, and we want you to tell her that 5 times a day, we pray for her and her family. And, that really brought tears to my eyes, because I was always afraid taking Dr. Hecht to Pakistan and saying, oh my gosh, she's Jewish. But the truth is that the people of Pakistan don't have Jewish people as neighbors like I'm so fortunate to have. And once they do, once they also are enlightened by what Islam truly is, it's continuation of Abrahamic lineage, they're going to think differently. And today I openly talk about, let's have better relations. Why aren't we celebrating our Jewish heritage. Karachi, the city that I was born in, there was a Jewish architect who built everything. I want that to be revived. And that is why I'm here and so strongly in favor of this beautiful initiative.
A lot of hidden history that not many people know about that's really important from there in Pakistan to the battle that we're talking about, the Battle at Uhud. Gwen, let me just ask you as well, when you're there in rural Pakistan, was there something that surprised you about the experience, about the reception you got?
I had nothing to compare to. I mean, we have schools and programs we fund in India and in Asia and other places in the world, and of course, the United States. To be quite honest, this was the first time I traveled to another country to see what our work was, what our money was putting together, to be honest with you. What are we accomplishing with what we're doing there? So I had no expectations, except Anila said, you'll be welcomed. And I have been. I was warmly welcomed in the homes of other people who wanted to say thank you for what you're doing for Pakistan. I was warmly welcomed by the ministers and the secretaries of this, that, and the other department, all very, very congenial and very pleasant and very generous. In the village itself, as remote as it is, 8 hours in and 8 hours back over what we call kidney busting roads in this country. They were awful roads, to be honest with you. Once I get to the village, I am greeted by children who are scattering rose petals. And then I'm taking on tours of all of the villages. And there was a beautiful, beautiful brunch. They put together this beautiful feast for me that they cooked for 3 days to make this food. And when I came home, when I left the village, at the village is plural at the end of the day, I was laden with handmade quilts and desserts, and people wanted me in their homes, which by American standards would be huts, thatched huts, one room, mud wall, had me in their homes to have some dessert, to have a little bit of a conversation. It was one of the most beautiful days of my life. And I cannot speak about it without tearing up. The generosity and the hospitality of these people, so grateful for what Anila and I were doing. I was humble. And like I said, I can't talk about it without crying. Beautiful, beautiful day. And it stands out as one of the most beautiful days of my life, truly.
It's so incredible what you are both doing, because the way I see it, and from what you describe, it's not just that you're building the schools that are so desperately needed, but you're also, in a sense, ambassadors for this idea of peace, for this idea of working together that many people aren't exposed to. And I can only imagine the impact that that has for each person that sees each of you there on the ground doing that work. Dr. Gwen Hecht and Anila Ali, thank you so much for joining us and telling us about what you're doing. Well, now I'll turn it over to two other incredible women, one you've heard from, both of Iranian origin, who fled the Islamic Revolution, both fighting for human rights in their native country, one Jew, one Muslim. Eli Kouanim is back with us for a special conversation with her friend and colleague, Iranian journalist Nazanin Ansari, another Mukhayriq Initiative board member and the managing editor of Kayhan London and Kayhan Life publications. And Eli, I'll turn it over to you both.
Thanks so much. As a daughter of Iran, it's a special privilege for me to introduce my friend and fellow Persian, Nazanin Ansari, a trustee of the Foreign Press Association in London and the Persia Educational Foundation. Nazanin Ansari has spearheaded groundbreaking efforts, including the first ever Iranian Women's Leadership Conference in London and the first ever Dialogues of Culture Award. She has worked with many educational foundations, including the Encyclopedia Iranica Foundation and the Friends of Persian Language Society at Cambridge University. Nazanin, I want to speak with you both as a Persian sister and as a Jew speaking to a Muslim friend. We both know that media headlines might make it seem as if Iran is at the heart of a deadly clash between Muslims and Jews. But we both know that there is a deep shared culture beyond the Iranian regime's angry chants of death to Israel. What are some inspiring moments of Muslim-Jewish connection in Iranian history? I've heard you in the past mention an event 100 years ago when the Shah of Iran prayed at a synagogue in the city of Esfahan. Was this a pivotal moment?
Well, thank you so very much, Ali John, for having me here. And I want to wish you and all the other guests and the viewers a very happy Nowruz. Persians all over the world celebrated Nowruz, the coming of spring, only an hour and a half, 2 hours ago. And I hope that this spring will herald a year relished with good health, love, peace, and friendship amongst us all. You talked about Reza Shah and the status of our Jewish community in Iran. I should just, before talking about what Reza Shah did, just spend a couple of minutes telling you what it was before Reza Shah came. And certainly the socio-legal economic status of the Jews of Iran goes back to the Safavids. During the Safavids, that was the first Persian dynasty after the Arab invasion of Iran. And because the Safavids adopted Shia Islam as the state religion beginning in the 17th century, there was a lot of a decree of forced conversions. But more importantly, I think their status, the economic and socioeconomic status of the Jews and their legal status was very much part of the Islamic attitude, not only towards people of other religions, but also towards women. But specifically, as the Jewish community was concerned, they had to pay an annual tax that was basically because of their religion. They could not contradict certain articles of the Constitution and of the law. They couldn't, they weren't allowed to build houses of worship. They weren't allowed to play bells or establish tall buildings or buildings taller than other Muslims. And they had to accept all the regulations imposed upon them. As far as marriage was concerned, Shiite men could marry women from the people of the book, including Jews, through a temporary marriage system. But it was not a traditional marriage system that was allowed between any man and woman of the Muslim faith. Also, as far as inheritance is concerned, the Jews could not inherit, for example, from a Muslim, whereas Muslims could inherit from everybody. And when it came to punishment, it was also, there was a discrimination as far as that was concerned. But let's go back to, now let's come to Reza Shah. When Reza Shah came to power, knowing all the weaknesses that the Iranian state before, during the Qajar period, had experienced. During the Qajar period, Iran was very weak. It was a country divided between the British in the south and the Russians in the north. And there hadn't been much development as far as industrially or militarily. So, and as Reza Shah was part of the new, most modern military army at that time in Iran, which was set up by the Russians, he had really experienced close hand, and he had witnessed what this backwardness meant for Iran. So when he came to power, he brought in with him all the beliefs and the aspirations of the constitutional movement in Iran, a movement that was based on enlightenment, the story of enlightenment in Europe. It was a story of the age of reason. And so certainly he followed also what Kemal Ataturk was doing in Turkey. And as far as he was concerned, it was through a secular state that Iran could modernize. It was only through citizenship and citizenry and active participation of all Iranian citizens that Iran could develop. And this is what he carried. And certainly when he came, he was in power, not only was he a good friend of the women, but also the Jewish community under Reza Shah prospered. Specifically, for example, they could take on various, any kind of profession that they wanted. Before, they couldn't. They could live anywhere they wanted, whereas before they could only live in the areas designated for them. They could, for example, take secured leave from the military during holidays, during Jewish holidays, whereas before they couldn't. And they could also now emigrate, whereas before it was unlawful. So with Reza Shah came a modern Iran. With Reza Shah came a participatory citizenry. And the Jews and our Jewish brothers and sisters were part of this modernization process of Iran. And by 1979, Iran's rate of growth and development was on par not only with Japan and even further, even it was on par with many of the countries in Europe. And that's because every single Iranian citizen felt as a shareholder in the future of that country. And this was the story that was not only about the Jews in Iran, but it was also a story about the women of Iran.
Absolutely, Nazanin. And that, what you're describing is the experience that my Jewish family had during the Shah's reign. I would love for our audience to, and the people joining us today, to learn a little bit about your personal experience. You've talked a bit about growing up in Iran and your educational experience. Could you tell people what that was like?
Well, yes. As I've told you before, John, it was only after the revolution that I realized that I was basically going to a school, elementary school, that was set up by a lovely Jewish woman who was very active. She was an activist and she was one of the leaders of the women's movement in Iran. She had set up a school, elementary school, that, no matter, I was Muslim, but we never, we came from a secular state, from a secular family personally. And my classmates and friends were either Christian, Armenian, Baha'i, or Jewish. We were taught by Jewish teachers, by English teachers, and by Muslim teachers. And it was only after the revolution that we realized that we had never talked. We had only seen and experienced one another as individuals and as friends. And certainly the Iran that I grew up in, even when I look back, I see many of the aspirations, for example, of the Iranian women's movement or of the human rights movement in general. It's what we had before. And it's like going back to the future. So in a way, I am blessed to have been born before the revolution. I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to study and work and be with my fellow citizens and my fellow countrymen and women, whether in Iran or outside of Iran now in the UK, regardless of what religion we have. Because at the end of the day, we are all human and all our bloods are red. So I hope the future will bring us closer together and let us realize that we connect as humans first and foremost.
Indeed, Nazanin, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that for many of us who are from the Middle East, North Africa, but exiled in the West, and we're fortunate to be in the West, but still we miss our homes. And many of us had that good fortune of living in times where there was coexistence between the different religions and the different ethnic groups. So thanks, my personal thanks to you for sharing your experience with everyone.
Yes, thanks so much, Nazanin Ansari. It's so great to hear, that story, and especially your childhood, how you grew up, the importance of that early education, of just, seeing the so-called other and what a difference that makes long term. Thanks very much for that. And of course, to Eli Kohanim, we'll be back with you in just a little while. But I want to turn now from there to London. Joining us from there is Fayaz Mughal. He's the co-founder and director of Faith Matters, a British organization committed to reducing extremism and building platforms for positive discourse between all faiths. He's also the co-founder of Tell Mama, which monitors and provides support for victims of anti-Muslim incidents in the UK. He's also the author of 2 books on faith and identity and co-founded Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, part of nearly 2 decades of work promoting better ties between Muslims and Jews. Fayaz, a pleasure to have you here with us. Why don't you tell us as well a little bit about your origin story? I mean, how did you come to doing this work? And I'm curious also, what kind of pushback have you faced over the years? I'm sure there was some.
So thank you very much, first of all, for having me on with such an esteemed set of guests. My in a way, entry into the world of coexistence and engagement work came about because I think pretty much that I was born into an environment where there was conflict. So I was born into an environment in Uganda in the 70s where a dictator called Idi Amin had ejected a lot of the Asian community. And I was one of those with my family. I was one then, but we were ejected out to the UK. And I've always had a history of being somebody that didn't quite fit into places because I felt like a wandering individual. And to some degree in that process, I was kicked out of Kampala with my family and out of Entebbe airport. And I remember as a young child, just snippets of what happened in 76, around 77, 78, my memory takes me back to those years where I remember what happened in Entebbe. And from then on, I always had a little bit of a link with the Jewish community, a little bit, there was just this little bit of a link to say, actually, it happened in the same place, it happened by the same person, and it happened because of effectively hatred and intolerance, the hostage taking of Israeli hostages in 76 by Idi Amin at Entebbe airport, and the kicking out of us as Asians because we were Asians. So there was this connection that started early in my life. Going on, as we went to Kenya, and then we sadly left again because of political instability and came to the UK. I realized in the UK that there were, as I grew up in my teens, there were quite a significant amount of fractures, particularly around issues on Israel-Palestine. And whenever there were issues around Israel-Palestine, there were also quite significant tensions here between British Muslim communities and Jewish communities. What happened in 2003, 2002, I got elected in Oxford as a councillor, a municipal member, and I realized in 2003 when there was the Gaza-Israel military attacks taking place at that time, I remember the Jewish community, which was very minuscule in Oxford, where I was elected, was feeling very fearful and very threatened by what was taking place in the Middle East, and the number of anti-Semitic incidences rose just in Oxford. Clearly, we know that the number of anti-Semitic incidences rise here, at least in the UK, and I'm sure in the US, and I'm sure in other countries. They rise when there are conflicts between Israel and Gaza, or when Gaza starts firing off stuff into Israel. The reality is these spikes in anti-Semitic reporting take place. So sadly, people start to target Jews with their own hatred and long-term insecurities and anti-Semitism. So in 2003 became, for me, quite problematic because I believe that as minority communities, why was one minority community, the Jewish community in Oxford, which is very small, feeling this sense of despair and insecurity for its own existence? So that led me to develop or engage a project, or develop a project at that point, to take Jews and Muslims from Britain to Srebrenica and to Auschwitz. And it wasn't to compare the two experiences, but it was to try to open up the hearts and minds of young people in that process. And sadly, I didn't get the funding for that program, but it led me on to do work on campuses with Muslims and Jews to look at their history. And the rest is kind of, in a way, history, because it led me on to work around countering extremism. It led me on through the 25 years to always take a position that respect, empathy, care, valuing each other's traditions, which are so interlinked within Islam. Many Muslims will feel fearful of saying this, but I'm very happy to say it. Islam's tenets are fundamentally built on the foundations of Judaic law, Judaic tradition, and Judaic faith. That's what Islam is built on. Its fundamental principles come from Judaic traditions. We have to say it. We have to be honest as part of the dialogue. So how can we, as Muslim communities across the globe, hate our umbilical cord? How can we hate our own umbilical cord that has fed us a part of our identity? So for me, that has been the battle. Now, the second part of your question is, have I come across hate? Well, yes. With the work I've done around tackling anti-Muslim hate, the attacks on me, my staff, my work have involved people getting imprisoned from far-right extremist movements. I'm always quite frank, and there has been an Islamist problem that has festered in the UK for a long period of time. And part of that Islamist problem has been many of the Islamist leaders that fled from North Africa and Middle East and fled from effectively campaigns to target them by people like Gaddafi, by people like Mubarak and others, meant that they actually took root in the UK. They got asylum in the UK. So they became leaders to try to mobilize young Muslims towards extremism, some young Muslims towards extremism. And so in a way that Islamist extremism took root. So part of my work has been to challenge them. So it's not been easy to say that our umbilical cord is based on Jews and Judaic tradition. Right. Okay, because Islamist extremists will always say, erase that history. And the answer is no, it's in your face. So the challenge has been exceptionally difficult, but it's a challenge we're overcoming because we're not giving ground on that. We're not giving ground on the ideological battle of changing people's perception to the reality of what they are and where they've come from.
A very powerful metaphor, Fayaz. Let me ask you, since you've been involved in this work for over 2 decades, what kind of changes or progress have you seen over that time?
Well, I've seen a younger generation right now that are much more willing to engage from the British Muslim side towards Jewish communities. So that's a real positive. Open-mindedness is really a strong starting positive block. 2, I've seen how lots within the British Muslim community are starting to ask questions that people would never ask before. Like questions like, well, if the Abrahamic Accords are taking place, why can't Jews go and pray in Saudi Arabia or go to Saudi Arabia? Now, these are healthy questions. They're healthy questions. Because what they do is they create better and stronger bonds as we move forward. As the world changes geopolitically, strategically, the Abraham Accords, the openness of Morocco, my friend and colleague on this call just said about the openness of Morocco, the flights going from Morocco to Israel, the work Eli has done on the Abraham Accords, opening up a whole range of other countries. That is creating an open-mindedness within young British Muslim communities. But let's also cut to the chase. Wherever Jewish communities and Jewish tradition has helped Muslims, we need to get it out to the public, hence this project. And I'm saying that because, I was also turned towards this work because when Sarajevo was being shelled and Srebrenica happened, where 8,000 Muslims were butchered by the machine gun and bayonet by Republika Srpska units at that time, when the butchery was taking place in Bosnia, it was Jewish communities that I could see on the television that were mobilizing to help Bosnian Muslims. For me, that was a turning point. And for me at that point, I said, right, life is nuanced. Life is not black and white. Life is about care and that sense of caring and standing up for the other. And so there are lots of historical elements of Jewish communities standing up for Muslim communities. We need to explain that and get it out.
Fayaz, I love hearing that. It's great to hear that, what you're saying about the more willingness to ask questions that you're getting. So important to ask questions, and also so important, of course, the work that you do, that there is somebody on the other side to either answer those questions or encourage them in the first place and not shut them down, which is so crucial, really. Fayaz Mughal, thanks very much for telling us about your work. And stay with us as we turn to another Mukhayriq Initiative board member, Ahmed Qureshi. He's a Pakistan-based journalist with 2 decades of experience in South Asia and the Middle East and North Africa, in addition to being the national security correspondent for the Pakistan Television Corporation. He's lectured at global forums, including the United Nations, and helped develop diplomacy initiatives, including the U.S. State Department's post 9/11 outreach program for the Islamic world, something crucial, of course. Ahmed, thanks very much for being with us. So, I mean, you have also been covering the Muslim world for many years as a journalist. You know, tell us a little bit about what happens that we don't read about in the headlines. What happens behind the scenes that you've witnessed?
Right. So I think one of the biggest stories happening right now that is underreported is how a Muslim-Jewish rediscovering of connections, historical, cultural, is happening. Of course, this initiative is one of them. And before I forget, let me just add, this has been immensely educating for me as well. The Mukhayriq Initiative, the naming of this initiative after a Jew who died fighting with and for the Prophet of Islam in a battle. And when I went to research more into this, and I was surprised how, for my entire education in both Pakistan, in the Gulf, in Kuwait, I was born and raised in Kuwait and lived in many countries in the region. I never came across this story, never narrated by anyone. I never read a book or an article about this. But when I researched it now recently, after the Mukhayriq Initiative idea came forth and I started researching this thing, I discovered that Mukhayriq had seven endowments that exist even today in Medina, in Saudi Arabia, as Eli mentioned, and those seven endowments continue to be, of course, in the name of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but they are, and the papers indicate even now that they were gifted by Mukhayriq ibn Nadir, who was a wealthy Jewish leader of the city of Medina at that time. And people continue, the people in Saudi Arabia, poor people who visit the Medina as part of pilgrimages every year, continue to, the poor people, they benefit from the profits of these seven endowments that Mukhayriq left. And these seven endowments have been operating for the past 14 centuries. Really an amazing, amazing story. So one of the stories that are underreported is how the Muslim-Jewish rediscovering of connections is happening underneath this veneer of state-to-state relations and ties. So you hear a lot, you've heard definitely over the years, and more so recently, about political ties and relations, the Abrahamic Accords. And that's a big, huge story, definitely. But it is the rediscovery of historic Muslim-Jewish ties by Arabs, by Muslims, by Jews. That is a bigger story and a richer story that is yet to be fully encapsulated in a news report or an article. And that's so because it is happening right now as we speak. Of course, this initiative is one example, but there are so many other examples are happening that are not really under the glare of the media. I mean, we have how Jews now recently and Muslims are discovering that one of the oldest copies of the Muslim holy book, the Quran, was translated into Hebrew for Jews to read and understand, and it's on display in a government museum in Uzbekistan, in a Muslim majority nation. People are also exploring now again the many stories of Muslim-Jewish amicable coexistence in Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Iran, Tunisia, Morocco, as was explained by my colleague earlier. Amazing stories. People are rediscovering all of these stories in multiple ways. So, and recently we had in the Gulf a hit TV series that explored with nostalgia the history of a small Kuwaiti Jewish community that later migrated into political turmoil. And there was a lot of debate around this. And I followed very closely the comments, the debates on social media, and people were like really interested and started digging up, nuggets of history of that coexistence that needs to be somehow restored. So this is an amazing story that is underreported. People are focused on the political side, important, no doubt about that. But the story of the Muslim-Jewish rediscovering of their old connections, I think, is the bigger story. And it is happening. And the good part is that now for the first time, we have states, we have governments that are actually supporting this initiative. One of those governments, obviously, is the government of the United Arab Emirates, as Rabbi Abadi was explaining earlier, a country that is creating an environment for an Arab Jewish and a Muslim Jewish reconnection, so to speak. So I think this is a great story, and let's be honest about this. For most of their histories, Muslims and Jews coexisted in peace, and it can be done again. Probably a lot of people used to say it, and hope it would happen one day. But I think we're standing at a moment in history, in time, where actually a lot of people are working for it. And it's more achievable now than at any time before.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about those initiatives, because so much of the time, especially as a journalist, as a fellow journalist, in the headlines and the discussions, we hear about governmental connections when they become public. We don't really hear about what's happening, amongst people. And those are two totally different things, of course. It's one thing for governments to have a relationship, which is so important, but it is another, and I think equally important, if not more, for the public, from a grassroots level, to really understand why those things are happening and get to know the other side. So let me just ask you, on the governmental side, especially since you're witnessing a little bit what happens behind the scenes, is it your impression that there will be other Muslim majority nations that might follow suit, that might follow in the footsteps of the Abraham Accords?
The short answer is yes. I anticipate, as someone who's following this story very closely, mostly from the national security aspect, and it's really developing in that area. But I anticipate, from the information I gather, I anticipate more countries really joining Abraham Accords or fashioning new accords on similar lines. And this is so because of another major development. People across the region now realize that political conflict must not lead to hatred for an entire people of faith. That conflict and coexistence must be delinked, and there's real debate in newspapers and on TV across the region. People are discussing this, and it's happening really for the first time in a long time. I remember I grew up really reading so much about hating, and it's so refreshing to see all these debates now about how to contain, limit, and end this hatred, and how maybe ending this hatred could really lead to resolving the political conflict that led to this hatred. So this is a really major development. In fact, restoring peaceful Muslim-Jewish friendship and coexistence can actually help resolve political conflict. Is not just a debate that is happening among intellectuals or people from the academia. It's really happening. You hear it from people in government, in influential countries in this region. And I tell you, I heard it firsthand from really very influential people who can influence policy in Pakistan, which is a major Muslim country, 200 plus million people. I heard it in Saudi Arabia. I heard it in Iraq, a country that is suffering major meddling from another neighboring country, from a regime really in a neighboring country that is trying to push Iraq into another direction, and other countries in the region. So So yes, there are clear indications that other countries could be joining or fashioning new accords along the lines of Abraham Accords. And let me just conclude this point by saying that all of this really is part of a third really major development, is that we can now expect to see, why we can expect to see more countries really joining alliances or accords similar to Abraham Accords. It's really because we're beginning to see the emergence of an alliance of moderate states in the Middle East, moderate states focused on common prosperity and security, common prosperity and security, instead of endless religious or populist conflict, to perpetuate regimes and governments that thrive on populism and conflict. So this is a major development. States that are moderate, that would like to see the emergence of a new system across the region that is built upon the principles of common prosperity and common security for all, instead, and replacing endless populist religious conflict. It's a huge development. It's an underreported story. You don't read about it. You don't hear it in the media. It's not in the mainstream, but it's really developing. And let's hope it succeeds, mainly because now we have people in government across the region who are thinking along these lines. And I so much wish that I, as a journalist, could be one of those journalists who could actually report on it and mention names and what's happening. Unfortunately, nobody wants to come on record yet on this, because it's really fermenting. It's in the initial stages, and let's hope it moves forward.
Yeah, well, yet is the key word there. It sounds like a dam, though, has been broken, and there is so much potential. You point to that, Ellie pointed to that earlier. And of course, it's important not to squander that potential in this unique moment in time, which is exactly what the initiative aims to do. Ahmed Qureshi, a pleasure to have you with us. Thanks so much for weighing in. Well, next I have the pleasure of introducing Albanian political leader and political economist Valentina Leskaj. She served as a member of the Assembly of the Republic of Albania for the Socialist Party and as the country's Minister of Labor and Social Affairs. Ms. Leskaj also co-founded the UNESCO Center for Women and Peace in the Balkan countries and was the very first Muslim member of the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement's Advisory Board. Ms. Leskaj, thanks so much for being with us, for being part of this conversation.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this initiative that I consider really a very important one.
So you were instrumental in organizing the first ever Balkans Forum Against Anti-Semitism. I had the pleasure to take part, so I can say it was really an amazing event, bringing so many nations together for a united front, a united conversation against rising anti-Semitism. What motivated you to make that happen?
Okay, if I will say, I mean, personally, of course, I'm very much motivated for two reasons. First, I come from a family, I grown in a family that it's a family that promotes the tolerance, and half of my family is Muslim, and my sister and my brother are married to Christian, and not any problem in my family. On contrary, we consider this as something that promote and give a good example of tolerance, and on the other side, we all benefit. And second one, I'm living in a country that is made with the three religions, but is known for tolerance in between the religions, and I will bring two very short stories. First, in one village, the Muslim community has a mosque, but the Christian community had no church. And so the Muslim community contributed to build up the church. And although they were very poor, who has possibility to give some money, gave money, and the rest they give some volunteer contribution. And in another region that they were 5 villages, they worked hard to build up church that it was run down and a church that it has been 600 years before. And they all together respect each other, they respect the religion of each other, and sometimes they celebrate together, both, let's say, occasions. But the most important thing that I'd like to mention today is what the Albanian people has done during the Second War with the Jewish people. The Jewish people, Jewish citizens after the Second War were 10 times more compared to the time before the Second War, before the war started. So people, they found shelter, they have been welcomed by Albanian people, and they have been saved sometimes with the life of Albanian people whom sacrificed, their life. But I'd like something that I find with great interest, and for me, it's really very, very meaningful. Many Jewish people as well, they fight side by side with Albanian people against the Nazis during the Second War. And these Jewish people that they fight during the Second War, side by side with Albanian people, today they are, of course, considered national martyrs, and they are respected very high in our country. So it's very important, that we bring this kind of positive examples that could help, let's say, for building bridges, as it is the item of the conference today, because I believe, and I think we all together believe, that building bridges is really, it's really very important to know each other, to accept each other, and of course is for benefit of all parts. Of course, I'd like to say something that we are speaking about a small country as it is Albania, but the presence of Jewish people in Albania lands dates back to the 1st century. By history, it is believed that the first settlement of Hebrews in Albania go back to early as year 70 century of century first, when a group of Jews escaped the Ionian Sea. And then the second one, it was on the 15th century, when many Jewish families, they escaped from Spain and came in Albania. So the roots are really stretched back for a long time in this country. But I'd like to say something. Although always we had, and we have been recognized as a country that we have tolerance and good understanding with different religions, and we never had problems, I'd like to say that the tolerance is not something that is coded into the Albanians' DNA or to the other countries' DNA. And for that reason, I consider these activities very important, because this needs to be cherished with a dedication as a value. And of course, we have always not stopped to understand and to explain to the people that this is for the benefit of both sides, especially nowadays that there is a very clear rise of extremism, especially political extremism. So I believe that this forum that it was done in my country, and I gave a modest contribution, is very important, because we adopted even IHRA definition, because I think that you cannot fight if you don't know something.
In the spirit of that, of what you're talking about, let me go back to the story of Albania and the Holocaust, because in many ways we're recalling history here in this event and learning from it, and many times a hidden history. As you mentioned, your country was the only one in Europe to actually have a Jewish population that grew thanks to its decision to accept Jewish refugees. If we're to sort of try to go back to that time, to maybe learn from it, to pull something into today, what do you think made that possible? I mean, you know, what was the driving force behind that atmosphere, that spirit, that decision?
I think that one is because, as I said, that a kind of consolidation of tolerance that does exist in my country, because we never had some religious conflict, although we are a Balkan country, and in Balkans it has been used religion by politics before. But in my country, this doesn't happen. And this is a culture that we need to promote and strengthen. On the other side, we are trying to keep up with some activities. And I'd like to mention not only the activity of the parliament, that it was said that it was very important, but for example, we have signed some memorandums of understanding between University of Tirana and Ilan Bar University, thanks to the valuable contribution of CAM and Impact, and of course, personal contribution of Robert Singer, because both of us, me and Robert, we are coordinating this project with the idea that we have to invest to the young people. On the other side, we are investing in publications. Recently, personally, I have published a book, but it's not only my book, as a part of, let's say, publications that address the question of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia as well, and hate language. I wrote a lot in my book. My book is about politics and democracy, but I wrote one part about anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate language. Because I think that it's our obligation to do so as citizens, first of all. But there are some other publications in my country which can help for schools. And we are collaborating with the Ministry of Education for school programs. Then there have been some other activities in our National Museum. It was an exhibition, and the exhibition that comes as a reflection of collective memory, given that it was given by a painter and his family. It was one of the families that saved some Jewish people. And of course, meantime, with the National Museum, we did organize the Albanian Israel Cultural Festival. I think that cultural activities could give better impact, of course, in knowing the history, culture, literature. And I'd like to mention two museums. We are not a rich country, we are a small country, but this is a message, and it shows that how important it is for us to promote the tolerance and, of course, to respect the human rights and to fight against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. One museum that is under construction, it will be a national museum. It will have this status as a national museum. Is built in a city, but has not finished yet, in a city when the Jewish community lived and is considered as a historical center. And on the other side, there is another museum in another city that can serve not only for testimonies, but for the education, for exchange. So we are promoting some activities, but as I said in the beginning, it's not something that is in DNA. We need to work every day in order to keep up with the promotion of building bridges and tolerance among us, because I think that both are, let's say, winners.
Valentina Lescaj, thanks so much for being with us and for talking to us about all of that. Very important, as you say, to do it on a constant basis. It's not enough to have one conversation, one meeting, or just announce an initiative, but actually to do the work. And all the people taking part here clearly are doing the work in such a powerful way. So thanks very much for that. And our final guest speaker is nicknamed Father of Peace in his native country of Ethiopia. Dr. Ephraim Isaac has served as a professor at Princeton, Hebrew University. Influence your interest in not only studying religion, but peace building?
Eli, thank you very much for your invitation. I am very impressed by this symposium. I think this is high time that we need this kind of a dialogue. Let me say, first of all, that the whole concept of having such an organization around the name of Rabbi Mukhayriq is very commendable. To answer your question, standing on one foot, it's a very difficult one. I was born in Ethiopia. My father was born in Yemen. And therefore, from my childhood, I was exposed to three cultures. That is the culture of my father, and then the culture of the Ethiopians, Orthodox Christians, and then a lot of the Muslim merchants who used to come to the village where I grew up. And actually, since there were no hotels, where would they stay? They stay in my hotel because they knew my father spoke Arabic, and they knew that here is a man in town who was a place to put them up. So I was very much exposed to interfaith. From my early childhood, I was exposed to the meaning of violence. When I was 4 years old, there was a major battle that took place in the town where I grew up between the Ethiopian army and the British army, and then the Italians on the other side. And I remember my parents, I was only 4 years, I don't really, it's like a dream to me now. I remember my parents digging a hole because we did not live in a house where we had miklat, what we call underground. So we had to dig a hole, and I think it took about maybe a week. And later, when the bombs started falling all around us, when the artillery started making huge noise, we all went into underground, and we sat there for 2 nights. And I can never forget, that's my first time in my whole life when I heard bombs raining like rain and artilleries. And then after 3 days, they told us that we should go away because the fighting is going to expand into our ridge, into the area where we lived. So I remember how sitting on my father's, on the back of my father on a mule, and my mother and the others, we went like maybe about 4 or 5 hours into the countryside and staying there. Of course, as a child, I really didn't understand what this was. But then after something like 2 months, my father used to go back and forth and check what was happening. The war ended and we came back. And I still remember when I came back, I said, "Where is my friend Desta? I want to play with him." And they told me, "Mo, he was killed by a bomb." And I said, "When is he coming back?" And they said, "He's not coming back." And I started crying, saying, "I want him to come back." I never understood what had happened with it. So this is the early childhood in which, as a child, I was exposed what warfare conflict means. on the positive side, let me just add, just move totally, completely differently. Another experience, of course, I had as a child is exposure to different cultures. As I already said, there were Christians around us. And then I never forget how the Muslims who used to come to our house and stay with my father, how they used to talk to each other, joke. And of course, sometimes my father actually told me stories almost like what Nazanin said about the relationship between Jews and Muslims in Iran. It was also somewhat like that in Yemen, where the conflict was ambivalent, sometimes very close, very friendly. And I saw it really even in my house when my father and the Muslim visitors staying with us were laughing, joking, enjoying each other. And then on the other hand, sometimes my father tells me stories about how the Muslims did not allow them to build big houses and stuff like that. So my childhood, then the third exposure I had was in the town where I grew up. The only important school was a Swedish mission school. So I went to that Swedish mission school, and in the Swedish mission school, of course, I was exposed to the teachings that I got my father always read, of course, the Hebrew Bible. By the way, he knew many parts of the Hebrew Bible by heart. I now have recordings of Genesis, Bereshit, and so on from my father in the Yemenite way, reading it that way. I would say that what really left impression on me as a child is, one, the nights when the bombs were exploding, and when I remember my best friend I was told, was killed by a bomb. That's why I became, from my childhood days, a peacemaker. Even I remember in elementary school, when my friends were fighting, I always used to jump in between them and say, stop fighting. I'm very proud of that. I don't think I ever hit a student myself, but when students hit each other, I used to jump in and say, stop hitting each other.
Your calling came early, it sounds like. So tell us a bit more about the work that you do. I mean, you use Semitic languages as a bridge to connect between those communities. Language, as we know, in more ways than one, is a pretty crucial tool in that. Tell us a little bit about what you've seen as the specific role of education in making that kind of change and educating.
Yes, thank you very much. Even from my childhood, I've always believed education is fundamental. I wanted to be a teacher, even when I was a kid. And that is why when I came to Harvard, I did my doctorate in Semitic languages and literature. And particularly, I did a study about the Jewish influence in Ethiopian culture. And I was very fortunate to have been appointed the first professor of African American languages, African studies at Harvard University, which today gives the prize in my name. And because I always believed that the key to interpeople understanding is language. And that is why around 1985, a group of professors from Harvard, Michigan, Berkeley, Pennsylvania got together and said, in the United States, universities teach Semitic languages like Hebrew and Arabic, but they don't teach all the Semitic languages. So we founded the Institute of Semitic Studies. The objective of this institute is, number one, to promote the study of these languages and how they are related. Number two, however, we believed that language is a bridge for interpeople understanding. I can give you many examples how language can cause wars. In the 19th century, there is a Battle of Uhud in Ethiopia. The Italian and the Ethiopian government signed an agreement in which the Amharic version says the Italians will be friends of Ethiopia and also connects Ethiopia with Europe. And the Italians all wrote in the Italian, translated it, saying the Italians will control Ethiopian diplomatic relations, meaning almost it will be and then that ended up in the Battle of Adwa in 1896, as you probably all have heard about it. And so that is the problem of language. Another story I remember when I was a kid is there was a missionary. He went out into the village and he was stopped by the police, and the police asked him, who are you, what are you? And in the Ethiopian language, he said, I am a sabaki. Now, sabaki with a ka means a spy. Actually, what he wanted to say is, I'm a sabaki, I'm a missionary, I'm a preacher. But you see, just making that little, and so the police arrested him and put him in jail. The Institute of Semitic Studies organized the first Muslim-Jewish relations between in Yemen, here at Princeton, through the help of Carnegie Foundation, and we had published a book on that. A colleague of mine from Haifa University and I have published this particular book. And then we organized a second one about 5 years ago at the Department of Near Eastern Languages in Princeton, where we had Yemeni Muslims and Yemeni Jews come together. Their food is about similar, their dancing was similar. We spent the whole day together and we kept together. Now, as I said, the situation is not that perfect, but understanding maybe that language especially is a bridge. Now, as you all know, Hebrew is a North Semitic language, Arabic is a South Semitic language, and they are very closely related. And I still very strongly believe that language has to be used to promote peace in the world.
Yeah.
It creates misunderstanding. Many wars, by the way, not only the one I mentioned before. In the 4th century, there was a major first Christian war was based on language, where at the Council of Nicaea, a group argued that Jesus was homoousios. Jesus was of the same nature. And the opposition said, no, Jesus is homoousios. And they wanted to add an I in between. They argued, they went into battle. Thousands and thousands of people were killed. So language is a very dangerous tool. In fact, also in Jewish tradition and even in Christian tradition, we say our tongue can bless or can curse. The way we use language can cause tremendous damage, or it can cause a blessing. I must say that I would like to see the world in which we live to come to understand that we must learn each other's languages so that we can communicate with each other. And not only that, but to promote language that is beautiful, language, not cursing language, not the language of curse, but the language of blessing.
Dr. Ephraim Isaac, really fascinating work you do. I'm glad that you got a chance to share that initiative that you'd like to do going into the future, and amazing stories. I think that very, very few people know about the impact of language historically, and in terms of the similarities between languages, certainly with Arabic and Hebrew, look no further than shalom and salam to know really how close those two are. Thanks so much for being with us. On that note, as we begin to come to a close, I want to turn back to the Mukhayriq Initiative's Managing Director, Eli Kohanim. Eli, this broadcast today is really just the beginning for you. So tell us a little bit more about what you have planned and how people can get involved.
Well, I just want to reflect a moment on everything I heard the board members and speakers share with us. I'm so personally inspired by all that we heard. And I feel we just took a journey around the world, from Africa to North Africa, to the Middle East, to South Asia, to Europe and the United States. Really, it has been a journey, and I look forward to continuing that. And I have to say, the Mukhayriq Initiative isn't about us as individuals. Today, we've spoken enough. Now it's your turn, everybody who's joining us, to take part and make an impact. If you, like us, believe that we can learn from history, as we did today, and create a better future for Muslims and Jews alike, as well as all people worldwide, then this initiative is for you. Today, I'm so happy to announce our two first programs that will allow you to get involved in this initiative to build bridges between the Muslim and Jewish communities. Over the next 6 months, we will run a new branded accelerator program for bold new ideas to help unite Muslims and Jews around the world. If you have an idea or a project that you believe can help this cause, please submit it by visiting our website. Winning entrants will receive a portion of a $50,000 seed funding pool and the opportunity to participate in a comprehensive 6-month program featuring unique mentorship and networking opportunities. For more information and to submit your innovative project, please visit our brand new website at mukhayriq.org. Also, using the hashtag Hamsa for Peace in the coming few weeks, a global social media campaign will be launched to share inspirational stories about Muslim and Jewish relations. Please register via our website, mukhayriq.org, and we'll send you details about the upcoming social media campaign soon.
Eli Kohanim, thank you so much for what you're doing, for making this initiative, the Mukhayriq Initiative, a reality, and for bringing together this incredible group of people. I think it's been really inspiring to hear so many different stories. As you said, it's really kind of been a trip around the world. So many different, unique stories stemming, in many cases, from interesting childhood experiences that are also a reminder of how important it is, the work that you do, that so many of you were actually led to your work through something that you were exposed to or experienced as young children, and how important it is to pass that on to the next generation, something all of you are doing in different ways. So thanks so much for being with us, and we hope you watching were also inspired by today's speakers. And as Eli just mentioned, this is really only the beginning. If you missed anything that we heard today in today's program, a full recording will be available online on the Mukhayriq Initiative's website and social media. And we look forward to seeing you at future events and programs, all aimed just like this at celebrating and advancing Muslim-Jewish ties right now and far into the future. I'm Nurit Ben. Thanks so much for being with us.